Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, local elections in Venezuela, a testing time for the new president and the media trying to cover him. Two giants of the tech world, from Amazon and eBay, ride to the rescue of the American mainstream news media. The Kremlin issues a presidential decree and tightens its grip on the news industry in Russia. And Mandela's story, as it would have been told had it happened in a different era. That's our web video of the week. When Nicolas Maduro became president of Venezuela earlier this year, he was succeeding the country's most media-hungry personality, the late president, Hugo Chavez. Chavez was known for marathon, 6-hour-long speeches disguised as television shows. In his first few months in office, Maduro is getting even more face time than his predecessor did. Chavez also waged a long-running battle against the country's big media outlets, most of which were controlled by right-wing opponents, and a few of which actually tried to have him overthrown. Chavez is gone, but the media war goes on. This week, in local elections that were seen as a litmus test for Maduro, the opposition accused the government of an outright information blockade. That followed the sale of a TV channel, Global Vision, back in May. Global Vision was the last voice broadcasting criticism of the government, and the takeover of the channel triggered walkouts by key journalists. Coverage of opposition rallies and press conferences subsequently reduced. Maduro may lack the Chavez charisma, but he is clearly intent on using the airwaves to counter criticism that he says comes from the right-wing elites intent on ousting him and the Venezuelan socialist revolution. Our starting point this week is Caracas.
Maduro and the media, at the beginning, he was trying to play the role of Hugo Chavez, being the strong man, and it didn't really work because he's not Chavez. Maduro doesn't have the ability to engage the people that Chavez has, but he's learning very fast. Maduro and his relationship with the media is a work in progress.
Usually, politicians try, at the very least, to appear to make nice with the media, even outlets they consider hostile. In Venezuela, such niceties go unobserved. Here are just some of the things Nicolas Maduro said about the Venezuelan media prior to the local elections, which were seen as the first unofficial referendum on his presidency.
Estamos siendo objeto de una censura programada de los medios de comunicación de la burguesía, televisión, radio, prensa, pero utilizan las páginas a llenarlas de veneno y de odio. Están buscando, ustedes saben qué, ¿no? Un clima social y económico que justifique un golpe de Estado en Venezuela. Mientras la censura se mantenga, nosotros vamos al combate con las cadenas nacionales de radio y televisión para que nuestro pueblo sepa la verdad de Venezuela.
And here is the flip side to that argument. Critics of the government, journalists, on what they call the one-sided coverage of the December 8th local elections.
Blackout informativo.
There was an information blackout during the elections, and this was clear when there were opposition rallies in Venezuela. And of the 52 radio stations that operate in Caracas, not one broadcast the rally live. Neither did TV cover it, and that instantly silenced the opposition. For 90% of the media in the country, the opposition simply did not exist.
The media coverage was the most embarrassing in history, unlike any other election. The government had an obscene advantage. We had the feeling that the media outlets had lost the democratic principle of presenting the other side of the story. And the government censored big media outlets, forcing Venezuelans to favor one political position.
2 points of view, polar opposites, and in a way, both are valid. When President Maduro talks about opposition media and coup d'etat, he is reminding Venezuelans of 2002, when the country's political right and 3 media outlets in particular, RCTV, Venevisión, and Global Vision, joined forces to temporarily force Hugo Chavez out of office. While Chavez was still under house arrest, the coup's leaders went on those channels and thanked them for the central role they played in overturning a democratically elected leader. When Venezuelans rallied and got their president back, RCTV and Global Vision went quiet and aired classic films and sitcoms rather than the news breaking in a direction the channels had not foreseen. Everything that has happened in Venezuela since then, involving politics and the media, should be seen in the context of 2002 and what leftists still call the media coup.
El pueblo ha sido The people have been systematically duped by the media for the past 14 years. After the coup, there was an information blackout. When they wanted the reality to be different to what it was, when the people were on the streets around Venezuela asking for the return of President Chavez, the media stuck their heads in the sand, and they failed to inform the public of what was going on.
And that is when I pinpoint the end of Chavez as a moderate figure in politics and start Chavez as a more radical figure, okay? And that included his relationship with the media.
Viene el presidente a votar y la periodista de Televen no se le ocurre preguntarle nada sobre.
So the context, what it tells you is that the government has lost the traditional ability of politicians to deal with the media because there's no ability to mediate between black and white. There's no gray spaces in which establish a dialogue.
It has taken a decade for the fallout of that failed coup to be fully felt. In 2007, RCTV's broadcast license was up for renewal, which was denied. The TV channel was effectively out of business. Globovisión took longer. The broadcast regulators sanctioned the channel repeatedly for alleged violations. It was fined $2.2 million for the way it reported a prison riot in 2011. The channel was also being investigated for alleged tax evasion. Earlier this year, Globovisión's owners threw in the towel and sold to a group led by an insurance executive with reported ties to the Maduro government. Between Chavez, Maduro, and the broadcast regulators, Venezuelan television has been completely reshaped, and critical voices are hard to find.
Con Maduro, por ejemplo, se gestó.
Under Maduro, they have figured out a way to control the media that was unknown up until now. When there are media outlets that make them feel uncomfortable, they just buy them out. These Chavista businessmen buy the channels out under their name, and the government remains invisible, and those sales are related to the wider strategy of closing down media. They use buyouts which look perfectly innocent at first glance as a way of controlling the media.
They've gone one step further now. The print media is under attack. Maduro recently lashed out on El Diario on TV for its reporting on petrol shortages.
Vienen a sabotear entonces, como hicieron en el 2002.
The next day, the outlet was facing a lawsuit. The newspaper El Mundo reported on how the central bank's foreign currency reserves were being used up, and the next day, they fired the editor. El Universal also said something about the shortages, and a legal investigation was launched immediately.
The print press's credibility has plummeted. There must be some reason for why the people aren't reading the papers from the big private outlets anymore. In elections last week, the Bolivarian Revolution won 80% of the minorities. That's 30 of the 40 biggest cities. But look at this headline from El Nacional.
Ever since Hugo Chavez was first elected in 1999, the Chavistas have had legitimate grievances with broadcasters owned by the right who were willing to back a coup if that's what it took to regain power. Some corrective steps were clearly necessary. However, Venezuelan media are no more reflective today of the society they serve than they were when right-wingers controlled the media. What the Chavistas have done is tilt the imbalance. The revolution continues to be televised their way. Our Global Village Voice is now on Maduro, the media, and the political power struggle in Venezuela.
Since the death of Hugo Chavez, I don't think the government is as active in confronting the media. However, that doesn't mean that the state isn't putting a lot of pressure on journalists. One example of this is that the editor of Venezuela's largest business daily, El Mundo, was fired after publishing a headline that was very critical of the government and its handling of the economy. So what we're left with now is the situation that I think the opposition and the politicians have a much harder time getting their message out to their supporters.
Now, the untold story of the Venezuelan media is actually the gradual democratization of the press, thanks to hundreds of community media outlets operating across the country. They're encouraged by the government with funding, but they enjoy editorial independence. These community media outlets should be central to this discussion, but their work often passes under the radar while we offer tea and sympathy to big corporations.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. In Russia, President Vladimir Putin is making changes that will reshape the state media apparatus there and cement Kremlin control. On December 9th, Putin announced that the RIA Novosti news agency will be dissolved to make way for a new agency called Rossiya Segodnya, which translates to Russia Today. The decree signed by Putin stated that the purpose of the new outlet would be to highlight abroad the state policy and public life of the Russian Federation. RIA, which was established under Joseph Stalin in 1941, had in recent years become known for independent reporting on some sensitive issues, such as the rash of anti-Putin protests in 2012. However, Rossiya Segodnya will likely follow a pro-Kremlin line, given the appointment of ultra-conservative talk show host Dmitry Kiselyov to head the new organization. Kiselyov has aggressively defended Kremlin policy and attacked its opponents. Reporting on its own demise, RIA Novosti's English language service described the change as the latest in a series of shifts in Russia's news landscape, which appear to point toward a tightening of state control in the already heavily regulated media sector. Here's a recipe for trouble in today's Turkey. Take a liberal newspaper, a whistleblowing journalist, throw in some reports about some government secrets, and what follows are criminal charges and a speech by the Prime Minister, which makes a potential mockery of a fair trial. The paper is Taraf. The reporter's name is Mehmet Baransu. The secret documents the paper published pertain to a political and social movement called Hizmet, which many Turks say wields too much power behind the scenes in Turkish politics. Baransu now faces charges including espionage that could land him up to 43 years in jail. In a speech, Erdogan said revealing state secrets cannot be considered freedom of expression. It is quite simply treason. The Prime Minister called Baransu a traitor and demanded that the court do its duty. Taraf's editors have accused Erdogan of preempting the results of the investigation and say they intend to take court action of their own over the Prime Minister's attempt to influence the court's proceedings. News has emerged of two Spanish journalists abducted 3 months ago while working in Syria. They appear to still be alive, although talks with their captors seem to have broken down. Javier Espinoza, a journalist for the El Mundo Daily, and freelance photographer Ricardo Garcia Villanova were abducted on September 16th. It was revealed at a press conference held a week ago in Beirut. The two were apparently close to the Turkish border in rebel-held northern Syria and were planning to exit the country when captured by members of the al-Qaeda-linked Sunni Muslim group, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL. Talks to bring about their release have apparently reached an impasse, and relatives of the pair then decided to go public. Espinoza's wife, who's a journalist, Monica Preto, spoke at that press conference. Today, we appeal to the Syrian people and all armed groups to help release Javier and Ricardo, she said, who have always been committed to show the human face and suffering of the Syrian people during these very difficult times. This next story sounds like one of those movies in which the would-be killer has a last-minute change of heart, shows a conscience, and swoops in to save his would-be victim. It's the story of internet billionaires putting money into the news business, the same industry that their new industry has been accused of destroying. Newspapers around the world have lost advertising and readers to the web. TV channels are trying to adapt to a viewership that's getting off the couch and going online. And their breaking news coverage seems slow when compared to Twitter and Google News. However, this year, Amazon's Jeff Bezos and eBay's Pierre Omidyar became the first dot-com billionaires to throw some serious money at the news business. Bezos bought the Washington Post a few months back for $250 million. Omidyar went a step further, announcing that he was starting a brand new media group with a band of investigative journalists, Glenn Greenwald of NSA fame and Jeremy Scahill of The Nation, among others. It's a novel twist in a media story that seemed to be heading for a loser ending, the bankruptcy of old mainstream media and the death of the news business as we know it. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the influx of tech money into the news sector and why the news game may never be the same.
The highly successful business model that existed in my entire 41 years working for print newspapers is gone. The internet has wiped it out. And it's much more difficult to make a profit selling news than it used to be.
If people with billions of dollars are going to come riding to the rescue, chances are they're coming from the internet. This Silicon Valley world where the mindset is when you look at a system that's not working, you see it as an opportunity, create something that's more efficient and build a big business there. Media is kind of the perfect opportunity.
It's been a big year for the future of journalism.
He's one of the richest men in the world with a reported fortune of more than $8 billion.
In October, the news broke that eBay founder Pierre Omidyar was teaming up with Glenn Greenwald, the journalist behind the NSA surveillance stories, to create a brand new media organization. Just a couple of months before that,
Amazon founder Jeff Bezos sent a thunderbolt through the media world.
The 136-year-old Washington Post was bought for $250 million. It was a big deal. Dot-com billionaire Jeff Bezos was bailing out a news institution whose losses have grown from $11 million in 2010 to $50 million in 2012. Not least because subscriptions and advertising in the paper have nosedived in the internet era.
This is an incredible brand which is based on doing journalism in a certain way, quite a serious way, and he doesn't want to lose that, but he realizes that he's got to do more than just trim a few budgets, change a few salaries. I think in a few months' time, Jeff Bezos is going to say, look, we do have to put the customer first, just like we did at Amazon. We have to build a massive audience.
Knowing Bezos' background, he's going to have them lean toward technology. What can technology do to help the Washington Post reach a greater audience and get more money from that audience, both in terms of advertising and in terms of circulation revenue?
If you're a billionaire who wants to save journalism, there are two ways you could do it. There's the Bezos way: buy an existing news outlet and give it a 21st century makeover. And then there is the route taken by Pierre Omidyar, who made a failed bid for the Washington Post and then decided to invest his money in a team of hard-charging investigative reporters. The Omidyar project has grown in the months since he and Greenwald announced their plans, but the actual details of those plans have been available only piecemeal: blog updates and brief interviews by Omidyar and some of the journalists collaborating with him. But there is a prototype of sorts that Omidyar has already created. It's 3 years old, and it's in Hawaii.
Honolulu Civil Beat is a news organization that's focused exclusively on public affairs journalism. Civil Beat was designed to meet what can be described as a fairly lackadaisical attitude toward public affairs reporting here in the islands. No one was really holding government accountable. No one was really holding public officials' feet to the fire in a way that we can do it.
Pierre really believes in hardcore journalism. That's really what his interests are. Knowing that really gives the reporters carte blanche into doing whatever they feel like they need to do to keep the public informed. Certainly, the Civil Beat has been a testing bed for what he wants to do with investigative journalism. I like to think of it as the warm little nucleus for what he's about to create.
Omidyar won't be the first to try to create a new business model for journalism in the digital age. The internet revolution has forced newspapers to rethink everything. Online paywalls are the theoretical answer, but they have yet to pay off. The New York Times' paywall is now 2.5 years old and one of the most successful in the business, delivering 750,000 subscribers. The company says the paywall keeps operations in the black, but the Times is one of those exceptions that in this industry almost proves the rule. And just a few weeks ago, Tina Brown, veteran magazine editor who tried to rejuvenate Newsweek by scrapping the print edition and merging its newsroom with that of the Daily Beast website, had this to say: "The digital explosion has been so explosive, there isn't a single place where the digital thing is a profit thing. The disruption hasn't brought a business model." For Omidyar and Greenwald, however, there is one news organization that might give them a hint of a possible funding model. ProPublica, based in New York, calls itself an independent, non-profit newsroom. Founded in 2007, it is primarily funded by philanthropic donations from trusts such as the Sandler Foundation, the George Soros Open Society Foundation, and the Knight Foundation, amongst many others. The money goes to produce the kind of investigative reporting that many mainstream newsrooms can no longer afford.
Our deep dive stories could cost anywhere from $50,000 to $500,000 to produce. How can you get this kind of accountability reporting in the era of the web? Partnerships are very important to us. We take our biggest stories, our stories that we think have the most potential for impact, and try to place them with other news organizations that can give them visibility to the readership that can cause the greatest impact.
In October 2010, ProPublica partnered with 5 news outlets, including National Public Radio and the Boston Globe, to report extensively on doctors and hospitals getting kickbacks to recommend drugs and medical devices. In 2011, the investigative outfit worked with the Washington Post for a story on the aftermath of the BP oil spill in the Gulf Coast and how people were profiteering from the cleanup operations. Through its journalism and extensive network within the news business, ProPublica has made its funding model work. A new Bezos-owned re-energized Washington Post and an Omidyar-funded serious news organization are welcome in a US media landscape dominated by corporate media. The lingering question is, will these new organizations become part of the corporate media themselves?
A company like Amazon is going to have so many different items of business in front of lawmakers in any given year. They spend a huge amount of money lobbying lawmakers already for their interests. So the potential for Bezos to want to put his fingers on the scales of the Post's coverage to help out Amazon's interests a little bit will be enormous, and it's something that will be watched incredibly closely.
Of course, if you put billions of dollars into a news organization, you expect it to reflect some of your values. We've seen that from previous proprietors like Rupert Murdoch. And I think with Jeff Bezos and with Pierre Omidyar, they have quite different perspectives. Both of them are highly connected, both of them are very powerful. So I think what you're going to see is that the journalists are certainly going to find themselves in different environment. Certainly the readers need to be conscious that their newspapers, their news organizations are changing.
More Global Village voices now on tech barons muscling in on the mainstream news media.
As far as tech billionaires buying up news media, yeah, I think their vested interests will preclude their journalism from being impartial. That may be a problem for Bezos at the Post, but no more of a problem than for all the other newspaper brands that we're attributing bias to. And Omidyar, I don't think his goal is to be impartial. His partner, Glenn Greenwald, out and out said this is a venture in activist journalism. Opinionated journalists can still be accurate, they can still be reliable, they can still tell the truth.
With Bezos, you have someone that's had a very domineering approach to the industry that he's existed in and operated in before. How that might be brought to bear at the Post, who knows? But in the case of Omidyar, you have something that's a little bit more of looking at journalism as something that's in transition. They're going to be looking at kind of how to bring that to bear on a new publication in a way that considers how readers are changing, how authors are changing, how publications are changing, and how media habits are changing.
Finally, on December 5th, South Africa lost Nelson Mandela, the first democratically elected president of that country, and the global news media have been capturing the story of a world paying its respects ever since. We've seen the obituaries, the reflective pieces about a freedom fighter once called a terrorist, a statesman affectionately known as Madiba, who was imprisoned for 27 years fighting apartheid. This video comes from a little-known South African digital company called Presence. It was made last year and asks the question, what would Mandela's story have looked like had the revolution he led and the time he spent in prison coincided with the social media era we live in today? For a fairly short video, it does an effective job of charting Madiba's long walk to freedom. It's called Mandela Story. It's our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.